My father died on a Tuesday in March. By the following Monday, his entire house was empty. Not sold, emptied, down to the nails in the drywall. My stepmother told me a charity had come and taken all of it. 3 weeks later, I got a past due notice in the mail for a storage unit in Okemos, $89 a month, 94 days overdue. I have never rented a storage unit in my life. The account was in my name, with my social security number, at an address I moved out of in 2019. I'm 41. I'm an elementary school librarian in Lansing, Michigan, going on 14 years in the same building, and my entire professional skill set is finding things and putting them in order, which is going to matter later. I'm divorced, no kids, and I live in a 2-bedroom apartment off Coolidge with a cat named Otis who hates everyone, including me. My dad was Walt. He was 74. He was a millwright at a plant in Delta Township for 31 years, and he could fix anything on earth with a hose clamp and enough swearing. My mother Diane died in 2011 of pancreatic cancer, 9 weeks from the diagnosis to the funeral, and my father did not know how to be alone. That's not a criticism. He genuinely didn't. He had never lived by himself, not one single day of his life. He met Carol in 2013 at a grief group at a Methodist church in Grand Ledge. She'd lost a husband too. They were married in 2014. She was 58 then. She's 69 now. She has one son, Bryce, who is 38, and who, at the time all of this happened, was working at a tire place in Charlotte and living in a garage apartment behind his aunt's house. I want to be fair here, because I've had 11 months to think about it, and I've had to be honest with myself about the early years. Carol was good for him at first. She got him to a cardiologist in 2015 when he wouldn't go for me. She cooked, she cleaned, she made him laugh, and I was relieved. I was genuinely, deeply relieved that my father wasn't sitting in that house alone watching the same 3 fishing shows on a loop. The first thing that ever felt wrong was so small I'm embarrassed to say it out loud. Thanksgiving 2015. I got there at noon like always, and the house smelled incredible. And Carol had done every bit of it herself. And in the middle of the meal she said to the whole table, "You know, Rachel, you're welcome to bring something next year, even just a pie. Whatever's easy for you." I had brought a pie. It was on the counter. She had put it behind the coffee maker. That's the entire incident. I went home, told my ex-husband about it. He said, "That's weird," we laughed, and that was that. But here's the pattern I can see now, and couldn't see for 9 years. Everything Carol ever did to me looked, from the outside, like hospitality. The second thing was the phone. Around 2017, my dad stopped picking up. He had always been the guy who answered on the second ring. Now it went to voicemail, and then Carol would call me back 40 minutes later and say, "Hi, honey, he's out in the garage, he'll get you tomorrow." And tomorrow he'd call, and he'd be a little confused about how long it had been. I asked him about it once. He said, "Your stepmother's got a system." I said, "What system?" And he said, "She keeps the phone on the charger in the kitchen so we don't lose it. Remember the charger in the kitchen? That's the whole thing, right there, and it took me 7 years to see it." The third thing was Christmas 2018. I gave my dad a framed photograph of him and my mother on their boat in 1989. He got very quiet, in a good way, and he set it on the end table next to his chair. By Easter, it was gone. I asked where it went, and he said Carol had moved some things around. I found it 2 years later in the basement, in a green plastic tote with the glass cracked. Remember the tote, too. It comes back at the end, and I still can't talk about it without my voice doing something. Now here's where I stopped being a daughter with a difficult stepmother and started being an obstacle. My father's heart failure was diagnosed in 2020. Congestive heart failure, and his cardiologist told me his numbers over the phone in 2021, which Carol was extremely unhappy that I knew. That was our first real fight. I had called the cardiology office to ask about a medication, and the nurse, who had no idea there was a situation, just told me. When I mentioned it at dinner, Carol set her fork down and said, "Rachel, I'm his wife. Medical information comes through me." And my father said, "Don't fight over me. I want you to hold on to that sentence because it's the only defense that man ever mounted in 9 years, and he used it maybe 40 times. After that it got structured." Carol took the calendar. I'd text my dad about coming out, and Carol would answer from his phone, the phone on the charger in the kitchen, and say that weekend didn't work because of an appointment, or his numbers were off, or he's having a low week, honey, let's shoot for the next one. So I switched to a fixed schedule because a fixed schedule is harder to cancel than a request. Every other Saturday, 2 hours in the car from Lansing out to their place near Charlotte, 5 or 6 hours sitting with my dad, 2 hours home. I did that for 4 years, 211 miles round trip, 96 visits. I know the exact numbers because I kept a spiral notebook of the mileage. My accountant told me in 2022 I couldn't actually deduct any of it, and I kept the notebook anyway because I'm the kind of person who keeps notebooks. 9 months later, that notebook is sitting in a probate attorney's file. And the whole time I was making that drive, the story Carol was telling the rest of the family was that I barely came. I found that out in pieces, the way you always do. My Aunt Marlene, my dad's sister, said something at a graduation party in 2022 like, "Well, you've got your own life. We all understand." My cousin Denise stopped me in a grocery store parking lot and asked, very gently, whether I was still not talking to Walt. Every single time I'd correct it. I was there 2 weekends ago. I'm out there constantly, and people would nod, and I could see them not believing me because Carol had gotten there first, and Carol was in that house every day, and I was the one driving in from Lansing. The last 2 years got uglier and quieter at the same time. In 2023, my dad was hospitalized for 8 days at Sparrow. Carol didn't call me until day 3. Her explanation was, "I didn't want to worry you at work, honey." In 2024, I asked him, alone, in the garage, whether he wanted me to come out more. And my father, 73 years old with oxygen tubing looped behind his ears, looked at the concrete floor and said, "You've got your job." And then he said, "You don't call as much as you used to." I said, "Dad, I call you every single week." And he said, "Huh." And then he changed the subject to a lawnmower. I drove home that afternoon and cried on the highway, and I thought about it for about a week, and then I let it go, because I told myself he was 73 and sick and getting confused. That is the single biggest regret of my life. Not that I failed to confront Carol, that I decided my father was confused when what he was actually doing was telling me the truth. The last thing before he died is the one every person in my family knows about, so I might as well tell it. My mother's cease chest. It was her grandmother's, actually, a Lane cedar chest from the 40s, and it sat at the foot of my parents' bed my entire childhood. In 2011, in the hospital, my mother wrote out a list of what she wanted to go where. It's 3/4 of a page in her handwriting. My name is next to the cedar chest. I have had that list since 2011. It is not a legal document. My mother's estate went entirely to my father, that's how it works. But it exists, and my father knew about it, and every single person in that family knew about it. In January, 2 months before he died, I brought it up. I said, "Hey, Dad, at some point I'd like to take Mom's chest, whenever you're ready." And Carol said, from the kitchen without turning around, "That chest holds all our linens." My father said, "Ah, we'll figure it out." He died on Tuesday, March 4th at 4:40 in the afternoon at home. Carol called me at 6:15. I got there at 8:30, and the funeral home had already come and gone. I stood in a bedroom that still smelled like him, and I never got to see my father's face. The funeral was that Saturday. Carol wrote the obituary. I was in it. I'll give her that. And on Monday the 10th, 6 days after he died and 2 days after the funeral, I drove out with empty plastic bins in my trunk because we had agreed on the phone that I'd come get some of his things. The house was empty. I don't mean tidy, I mean empty. His chair was gone. The kitchen table was gone. The pictures were off the walls and the nails were still in the drywall. The basement was a concrete floor and a water heater. All 4 of his toolboxes were gone out of the garage. His truck was gone out of the driveway, and I found out later she had sold it for $4,000 on the Thursday between his death and his funeral. I stood in my father's kitchen, and my voice did not work for about 10 seconds. Carol was standing there in a cardigan with a cup of coffee, and she said, "Honey, I know, it's a lot, but I couldn't have it all sitting here reminding me." I said, "Where is it?" She said, "A charity came Friday and Saturday. A truck. They took everything." I said, "Which charity?" And she said, "Oh, honey, I don't know. Bryce set it up." Then she went to the counter, picked up a piece of notebook paper, and handed it to me. It was handwritten in ballpoint. dated January 22nd, 6 weeks before he died. It said that all household goods, furnishings, tools, and personal property were to go to his wife, Carol. It was signed Walter R. Prescott in a shaky version of my father's handwriting. It was witnessed by Bryce and by Carol's sister Faye. It's called a personal property memorandum. That's a real legal instrument. In Michigan, a will can reference a separate signed list disposing of tangible personal property, and it gets honored as part of the will. Carol had been a bookkeeper for a construction outfit for 22 years. She knew exactly what one was and exactly how one is supposed to look. I said, "Carol, the cedar chest is on my mother's list." And my stepmother looked at me over the rim of a coffee cup and said the sentence I will be hearing when I'm 80 years old. She said, "Your mother's been gone 13 years, Rachel. At some point, a thing is just furniture." I'd love to tell you I flipped a table. I stood in that empty kitchen holding 2 plastic bins and I said, "Okay," and I left, and I sat in the driveway of my dead father's house and I did not cry because I couldn't yet. But on the way out I noticed something, and I did not understand it for 3 more weeks. There were tire ruts in the side yard. Deep ones, cut through the grass in March mud, running right up to the side door of the garage. 2 vehicles wide, side by side. Nobody backs a charity box truck across a soft lawn. You back a rental truck across a soft lawn when you're loading it twice in 2 days and you'd rather not be seen from the road. A lot of you are going to ask why I didn't hire a lawyer that same afternoon, and the honest answer is not flattering. Because a lawyer costs money, my father had almost nothing. And I genuinely believed in those first 2 weeks that fighting over a house full of furniture would turn me into the exact person Carol had been describing to everyone for 9 years. That's the trap, and I want to name it plainly, because I think a lot of people are sitting inside one right now. She spent 9 years building a version of me who was greedy and absent. So when she finally took everything, the only way to object was to behave exactly like the greedy, absent woman she'd invented. So I did nothing for 18 days, and in those 18 days the family made itself extremely clear. Aunt Marlene called on the Wednesday. She said, "Sweetheart, I hear you had words with Carol about the furniture." Words I had said 9 sentences in an empty kitchen. I told her the house had been stripped in 6 days, and Marlene said, "Honey, that's just how some people grieve." She couldn't be around his things, and then she said, "You know she nursed him for 4 years. Right, she did." While I drove 211 miles every other Saturday, my cousin Denise texted me. "I know it's hard, but Carol is family too, and she's alone now." Bryce put something on Facebook that Thursday about how some people only show up when there's something to collect. He didn't name me. He didn't have to. 11 people liked it, and I recognized every one of their names from my father's funeral. And that Sunday, Carol called me, sweet as anything, and asked if I'd like to come get a few keepsakes. She said she'd set some things aside for me. I drove out, 2 hours. I want you to picture what was waiting: a grocery bag on the porch. In it were 3 of my father's flannel shirts, a coffee mug from a marina in Ludington, and a shoebox of loose photographs. Every photograph in that box was of me, not one of my mother. She stood in the doorway and said, "I thought you'd want something personal." I said thank you. I took the bag. I drove home, and I'll be honest with you, I sat in my apartment that night holding those 3 shirts, and I thought maybe this was going to have to be enough, and maybe I was making it into something it wasn't, and maybe I was just grieving wrong. That is exactly where I was, mentally. On the 2nd of April, when I got the mail, there were 2 things in it. A jury summons, which I threw away and shouldn't have, and a past due notice from a self-storage facility on Jolly Road in Okamo's Rachel M. Prescott. My old address on Coolidge, the one from before 2019. Unit 214, 10 feet by 20 feet. $89 a month, 94 days past due, total balance of $289.35. With a paragraph at the bottom about lien sale procedures under the Michigan Self-Service Storage Facility Act. I sat on my apartment floor and did the arithmetic 4 separate times, and it would not come out any other way. 94 days past due on the 2nd of April means the account stopped being paid at the very end of December. Which means the unit was opened before that. My father died on the 4th of March. That unit existed before my father died. That is the exact moment I stopped grieving and started working. I got out a legal pad, I still have it. The first line on it says, April 2nd, notice. Unit 214, who signed it? I drove to Okemo's the next morning before school. The manager's name is Val. She has run that facility for 11 years, and she is the single reason I have anything at all today. I put the notice on the counter and I said, I need to see the lease for this unit, because I have never rented a storage unit in my life. She said, that's a serious thing to say. I said, I know. She pulled it up, printed it. A signed lease dated December 12th. My name, my old address, my social security number. My driver's license number, an expired one, from a license I replaced in 2021, which Carol would have gotten off some old piece of paperwork in my father's filing cabinet. Emergency contact listed, Carol Prescott. Relationship. Mother. And the signature said Rachel M. Prescott in big loopy cursive with a flowery capital R. I have signed my name the same way since I was 19. It's basically a flat line with a hook on the front. I sign 200 permission slips a month. I put my driver's license on that counter next to that lease. Then my library district badge. Then a credit card, and I said, I didn't sign this. Which means you're about to let me into that unit. Val looked at those two signatures for a long time. Then she said, Ma'am, that is your name on this lease. The person on the lease has access. I said, so do I walk down there right now, or do I call the sheriff first? She said, give me 1 minute. She called her district manager. I stood at that counter for 11 minutes. Then she came back with a bolt cutter and a clipboard and said, I'm going to document that the leaseholder requested entry. I'm going to be present the entire time, and I'd like you to record this on your phone. Val is a good person. I sent her a plant. Unit 214 is 10 feet by 20. It was packed to the ceiling, all 4 of my father's toolboxes. His welding rig, the kitchen table, 9 banker's boxes. His recliner, the one with the duct tape on the left arm wrapped in plastic, $2,000 worth of fishing equipment, easily. And the framed photograph of my parents on their boat in 1989, the one with the cracked glass, sitting right on top of a box like somebody had grabbed it last. And against the back wall, under a blue tarp, my mother's cedar chest. I sat down on the concrete floor of a storage unit in Okemo's and made a sound I have never made before or since on video, with a stranger standing behind me being extraordinarily kind about it. This is the part I have started and stopped writing about 9 separate times. I did not open the cedar chest that day. I couldn't. I photographed everything. Val documented everything. I paid the $289.35 to pull the unit out of lien sale, and I put my own padlock on the door, and I drove home and threw up. The next morning, I called a probate attorney in Lansing named Gail Ostergaard. $250 for the consult. I brought the storage lease, the past due notice, the personal property memorandum, my mother's list from 2011, and the mileage notebook. Gail read all of it, and then she took her glasses off and said, Okay, I want to be careful here, because you're about to tell me you want to fight over furniture, and that is not what this is. I said, then what is it? She said, somebody opened a financial account in your name using your social security number. That's identity theft. Everything else in this pile is downstream of that. And then she asked the question that changed the entire shape of the case. She said, the unit was rented on December 12th. Your father died March 4th. Why does a woman rent a 10 by 20 storage unit 3 months before her husband dies? I said, because she knew he was dying. And Gail said, sure, or because she needed somewhere to put things before anybody could inventory them. That was the first time in my life anybody said the word inventory to me. Here's the short version of what she explained. When someone dies with a will, the personal representative files it with the probate court, and that person has a legal duty to inventory the estate. Everything the deceased owned at the moment of death, and then account for all of it. Carol had filed to be personal representative on the 19th of March. Her inventory, filed in April, listed the house, 1 checking account, and I am quoting the document, miscellaneous household goods of nominal value, disposed of by memorandum. If you empty a house into a storage unit rented in somebody else's name, then on paper that property was never in the estate at all. And if anyone ever does find it, the lease says it belongs to Rachel M. Prescott. The greedy, absent daughter everyone has already been told about for 9 years, Gail said it out loud, flatly. If this ever came apart, you were the one who was going to be accused of hiding assets from probate. That is what the lease is for. She filed 3 things: a petition to remove Carol as personal representative and compel a full accounting, an objection to the personal property memorandum, and she walked me through filing an identity theft report with the Lansing Police Department, plus a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission, plus a fraud alert on all 3 of my credit files. I did the police report on a Thursday, case number, the whole thing, and the officer asked me a question I had not once thought about. He said, "Ma'am, has any credit been opened in your name besides this?" I pulled all 3 credit reports that night. There was a store card, opened in October at a home improvement chain in my name at my old address, balance of $1,140. The charges were from October and November lumber, shelving brackets, and $280 worth of plastic storage totes. She bought the boxes to pack my dying father's house on a credit card in my name 4 months before he died. Now I have to tell you about the cedar chest, and I've been putting it off for 11 paragraphs. I opened it 8 days later, in my apartment, with my friend Kathy from work sitting on the couch, because I asked her to be there, and I'm glad I did. The linens Carol said were in it were not in it. Inside were my mother's things, her wedding dress, a christening gown, a photo album, and sitting on top of all of it, a green plastic tote. The same kind of tote that had been in the basement with the cracked picture frame, which is how I recognized it. There were 3 things in that tote. The first was a bundle of envelopes held together with a rubber band. 43 of them, addressed to me at my apartment on Coolidge, my current address, correctly in my father's handwriting. Stamped, sealed, never mailed. My father dated everything the way a shop foreman does. He wrote the date on the back flap of every envelope. The earliest one was from March of 2021. The most recent was February 19th of this year, 13 days before he died. I've read all 43 now. I'm not going to reproduce them here. They're mine, but I'll tell you the shape of them. They aren't dramatic. My dad was not a dramatic man. They're about the weather, and the tigers, and the neighbor's dog, and whether I'd changed the oil in my Escape yet. And then every 3rd or 4th letter there's a line like, "I don't hear from you much these days, but I know you're busy." And in the last several there are lines like, "Carol says you called and I missed it. I sure am sorry I keep missing you." He was writing letters to a daughter he believed had drifted away from him every few weeks for 4 years, and then handing them to his wife to mail because he couldn't drive himself to the post office anymore. The second thing in that tote was a shoebox of cards, birthday cards, Christmas cards, get well cards, mine, the ones I sent him, every single one slit open along the top with a letter opener and slid back into its envelope. He never saw them. Not one. The third thing was a small notebook. Spiral bound, the kind you buy at a drugstore, the kind my father used for job notes for 31 years. And I need you to understand what this was, because it took me a full day to understand it. It was a list of dates. Just dates, and a few words after each one in his blocky shop handwriting. The first one I read said May 12th. Asked Carol if Rachel called. She said no then, May 19th. Asked again. Still no, June 2nd. Carol says she left messages for her, June 21st. Nothing, and then one from the 4th of July that says, "Rachel didn't come today. Carol says she had other plans. I was there that day." I have a photograph of my father in a lawn chair in that backyard from that afternoon, holding a paper plate with a flag toothpick stuck in a hot dog. I took it myself. The notebook has about 140 entries across 2.5 years. The same 3 or 4 sentences over and over in different weeks, asked Carol. She said no, asked again. Nothing this week, the last entry is from February, it says. Carol says Rachel is busy. Ask Marlene to call her for me. My father knew something was wrong. He couldn't work out what, and he was 73 with heart failure and no phone he controlled, and a wife who managed every piece of information that entered that house. So he did the only thing a millwright knows how to do with a problem he can't solve. He started writing down the data. He kept a log. On his own wife, for 2.5 years. And he hid it inside my mother's cedar chest, which was the one object in that entire house that Carol had already announced she considered hers. I don't know for certain that he hid it there so I would find it. I have thought about that every single day since April. Kathy thinks he did, Gail thinks he did. What I do know is this. When Carol packed that house, she took the cedar chest because it was worth money, and she never opened it, because she had spent years telling everybody it was full of linens, and she had no reason on earth to look inside a lie she'd already gotten away with. It's been about 11 months. Here's where all of it landed, and I'll go in order, because the order is the entire point. The identity theft was the crowbar. Every other thing came off of that one hinge. The Lansing police report went to the Ingham County prosecutor's office in May. I want to be clear that I had no idea whether anything would come of it. Gail told me straight out that these cases get declined constantly, that a prosecutor has 100 files on the desk, and that a stepmother and a stepdaughter fighting over a dead man's furniture looks like a civil matter from 40 feet away. What made it stop looking like a civil matter was 3 documents sitting next to each other. A storage lease with a forged signature and my social security number. A credit card application from October with the same. And a storage unit rented 3 months before the death, packed with the deceased's entire household in the 6 days after it. The prosecutor charged it in July. Identity theft under Michigan law, plus using a financial transaction device without consent for the credit card. And here is the part I did not see coming, and that I still think about constantly. The person who broke it open was Bryce, Carol's son. The one who set up the charity that never existed. The one who posted about people showing up to collect. He had signed the personal property memorandum as a witness. He had also rented one of the 2 trucks, and rental companies keep records, and Gail subpoenaed them. There is a 26-foot truck rented on his debit card on the 7th of March and returned on the 9th. The prosecutor's office interviewed him in August with his own attorney sitting beside him because he was 38 years old, had never been in trouble in his life, and was looking at being charged as a party to identity theft. He made a statement. He said his mother told him in November that Walt wasn't going to make it through the winter, and that they needed to move things before, and this is his phrasing, Rachel got lawyers involved. He said he was told the storage unit was in my name for tax reasons, which is not a real thing, and he said he believed it at the time, which I actually do believe. And then he said one more thing, which is in the written statement, and which Gail read to me over the phone in her office, and which I made her read to me a second time. He said that back in 2021, he asked his mother why there were letters from Walt sitting in the glove compartment of her car, and she told him they were for a daughter who had already made her choice. He knew for 4 years. He watched a dying man hand his wife a sealed envelope every couple of weeks, and he said nothing to anyone. And he only ever said it out loud in August with a defense attorney sitting next to him. Carol pled in November. Attempted identity theft, a reduced charge because she is 69 with no prior record, and that is how these things go. 2 years of probation, restitution of $11,400, covering the credit card, the storage fees, and the truck she sold, and a felony on her record for the rest of her life. The probate side moved faster. The judge removed her as personal representative in June and appointed a neutral professional fiduciary. The personal property memorandum was thrown out because the handwriting in it does not match anything my father wrote after 2022, including the notebook, and because once there is an active identity theft charge involving a forged signature by the same person, a judge does not need a great deal of convincing. Everything in Unit 214 was inventoried into the estate. The house sold in September for $248,000. Under Michigan law, Carol was entitled to a spousal share, and she received it. I'm not going to pretend I got rich. After everything, my share came to about $91,000, and I would hand back every dollar of it to sit in that garage with him one more Saturday. But I got the cedar chest, and the recliner with the tape on the arm, and 4 toolboxes, and a photograph of my parents on a boat, which I had reglazed for $11 at a frame shop on Michigan Avenue. The family took longer than the courts did. Aunt Marlene called me in August after the charges became public. She cried on the phone. She said, "I want you to know she told me you'd stopped calling him." I said, "I know she did." And then I said the only cruel thing I have said in this entire mess, which is, "Aunt Marlene, he asked you to call me. It's in his notebook." February 24th. She didn't have an answer for that. We're all right now, mostly. She comes over. She's 78 and she's carrying it, and I've decided not to add anything to the load. My cousin Denise sent a long apology text in September and I answered it in about 4 words, and I'm not proud of that either. Bryce sent me a letter in December. 2 pages, handwritten. It is the only actual apology in this entire story. He doesn't explain himself. He doesn't say he's sorry I felt a certain way. He says he knew, and he did nothing, and there is no version of that which is okay. I haven't answered it. I might. Kathy thinks I should. I don't know yet. Carol has never contacted me. Not once. Not before the plea, not after it. The only thing I know she has said about any of it came through her sister Faye, to Marlene, and it was this. I did 9 years of nursing that man, and she wanted a wooden box. That's her whole position, and here's the thing I had the hardest time accepting. I think she believes it. She wasn't cackling in a kitchen somewhere. In her mind, 4 years of caretaking bought her the right to everything in that house, and the right to treat a daughter 2 hours away as a problem to be managed. And the letters, which I've thought about more than anything else, weren't malice in her head either. She thought she was protecting a peaceful house. Every letter she didn't mail and every card she opened and dropped in a shoebox was, to her, one less complication in a difficult week. One last thing. 4 of those 43 letters have money in them. 2 $20 bills each, folded inside the paper, from 2021 and 2022. Back when my dad still figured a grown woman with a mortgage might need gas money to get out and see her father. 8 $20 bills. $160. They're in a frame on my living room wall now, along with the last letter, the one dated February 19th, 13 days before he died. Kathy helped me pick the frame out. It looks completely insane, and I don't care even a little. So here's what I need to ask, because 2 people in my own family have now told me I went too far, and my aunt said to my face in September that pressing charges against a 69-year-old widow was not what Walt would have wanted. Was I wrong to take the identity theft to a prosecutor instead of settling all of it quietly in probate court, knowing a felony would follow that woman for whatever years she has left? And here's the one that actually keeps me up at night. Is Bryce, who watched his mother keep a dying man's letters in the glove compartment of her car for 4 years and never said a word, really any better than the woman who wrote none of them and mailed none of them?